Four, three, two, one. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good Easter and a good weekend. I wanted to cover some leaks that are not particularly new as of today, but they go against my previous predictions, which is why I thought today's subject might make more sense to do as a live stream than as a public stream. Sorry we're back on the MacBook Pro webcam today. It's just mostly because my cam link has started freaking out. Or it's possible that the cam link is fine, but the adapter I plug into my MacBook Pro is wigging out. So I might have to experiment with some more equipment before I go back to my standing live stream setup. But that's good because Russell G says I feel less engaged with the audience when I'm standing up. So hopefully this one makes you feel better. I did this just for you, Russell, no one else. But, yeah, the M2 Mac Mini, I think, was essentially referenced in a firmware update for the Studio Display. It was getting a firmware update, and there was references to this unreleased Mac Mini. Some people are toying around with the idea that maybe it's an M1 Pro of a certain demographic, but I don't think that they would jump from the M1 Pro at this point because Gurman has said that they are testing like all these different M2 equipped Macs right now, and Max Tech has also been diving into this limitation he's discovering with the amount of power draw the M1 Ultra can actually obtain. So essentially the GPU core difference between what is it, 24, 32, no, it's like the GPU difference between the 48 core and 64 core are very, very minor. And it's very difficult to find any software or applications that actually take advantage of the 64-core GPU in the M1 Ultra, and it's definitely not getting anywhere close to the performance Apple claimed it would have when they announced it. But all of that to say, there are these limitations that Max Tech has discovered within the M1 Ultra. It's very complicated and goes down this nitty-gritty path. I could just read the tweet thread he went off, but it's basically like this scaling effect of the number of channels you can sustain with the ARM architecture and the amount of actual GPU improvements you can get out of that chip starts to find its own limitations when you make chips that large. When you make something trying to have as much power as a RTX 3090, which it definitely does not. And they never really realized this limitation until the M1 Ultra because it wasn't quite the limiting factor with the M1 Pro or M1 Max chips. You know, the limiting factor with those architectures and getting faster graphics was just the pure number of CPU cores and the number of GPU cores. Now that the M1 Ultra is like, okay, we've got freaking 20 CPU cores and 64 GPU cores, they're finding out what these channels that they build into Apple Silicon start to max out at, and that's why they're not seeing the power draw get to 105 watts, which is what they said at the unveiling, or at least through their chart. It's maxing out around 80, which means it's still a very efficient chip. You know, the amount of performance you can get out of something that's running on very little power is still quite good, but it shows that the M1 architecture may not quite be as scalable after a certain point. Which very well may be the reason that the Mac Pro is not ready yet, and personally why I feel more comfortable saying I don't think the Mac Pro is going to launch this summer. I guess there's a greater than 0% chance in my mind that the Mac Pro could be unveiled in June, but I don't think it would ship in June. I still think that they're probably going to wait to build it on the M2 or whatever the next generation architecture is. You know, the M1 is basically a beefed up, it's essentially a rebranded version of the A14X chip, whereas I think the M2 is going to be mostly built on more so the A16 chip architecture, and the chip that they want to put in the Mac Pro, which is going to be, you know, 40 CPU cores and 128 GPU cores. You know, it'll be an absurd chip, but they want the fundamental architecture to be built more on the A16 than the A14. So I don't know, I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible, and that still probably sounds fairly complicated, but because of this more recent reference in the Studio Display firmware of an unannounced Mac Mini, it kind of goes against what my previous predictions were, which is that Quadruple UDC this year was going to be all about software and there wouldn't be any hardware. You know, if they're baking references to unreleased Macs in the Studio Display firmware, this would be pretty early. You know, like if they weren't planning on launching the M2 Mac Mini or the MacBook Air until October, I definitely don't think they want to do it in September because that's iPhone season and they want iPhones and Apple Watches and all of that to get primary media attention. Um, so I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing that they would be comfortable announcing a bunch of new software and a bunch of cool hardware at the same time. But Gurman said they had at least two M2 or Apple Silicon Macs to go, and he said one of them would be that MacBook Air. And he's got a pretty reputable track record. And if he's saying the MacBook Air is going to be ready, and we're seeing references to an unreleased Mac Mini, it kind of these rumors and these leaks are kind of pointing to the concept that there would be M2 launch in June. Maybe not necessarily the Mac Pro. I definitely think it would be weird to launch, here's the Mac Mini, here's the new MacBook Air, perhaps here's the new 13-inch MacBook Pro that also has the M2 chip. Mac Rumors had a source that claimed there was going to be another 13-inch MacBook Pro that still had the touch bar and everything was exactly the same, but just the only difference is it had the M2 instead of the M1. I was like, that sounds boring. So it sounds like something Apple would do because it's so basic and it's so simple of a spec upgrade. Just slap the M2 chip in there. And I'm like, well, if you are bringing the M2 chip to the Mac Mini, why not also slap it in the MacBook Pro and just reuse as much of it as you can? If they had all these new M2 equipped Macs ready to go, would they also want to talk about the new Mac Pro at the same time? Don't get me wrong, it would be fun. It would be an eventful moment, but I have a hard time believing they would put that much in one event. Thank you for the super chat, Alpha. He says I'm still heartbroken about no big screen iMac. I guess I'm less heartbroken about it because the 24-inch iMac is Apple's view of what a pretty all-in-one iMac is supposed to look like. So even if they did do a big screen iMac, it would probably still look kind of ugly. It would either be white bezels and a chin. So just imagine the exact same 24-inch iMac we have now, just bigger. I don't really see that as much better. Or because it's more pro-oriented, they would give it black bezels, but based on how they designed the studio display, and that thing's pretty thick, and it doesn't even have a M chip in it, I imagine even if they did an iMac Pro, it would probably still have a chin, which means that I'm not that interested in it in the first place. I mean, performance-wise, it might be a good deal, I guess, but yeah, it would be interesting if they still had one, but I'm not heartbroken about it. Let's just see. What's your opinion on lossless audio on HomePod Mini? I'm not... You know what's funny is I don't consider myself an audiophile because I've tried on high-end headphones and I've listened to lossless audio in the past, and I don't find it that much better or that different. Like, I can't detect most of the differences, but what's weird is that there's certain audio things I've listened to in the car or with headphones, and I can pick up things that normally only audiophiles can pick up. And my wife's even called it out. She's like, how can you hear those little details? Like, I can barely hear that. So maybe I'm somewhere in between. Maybe I'm better at picking up audio than I think. But the main issue with the HomePod Mini is just that the tweeters and the woofer in that design, they're good, don't get me wrong. It gets very loud and it's very clear for how for how big it is. It's quite compact and still sounds really good. But the difference between just a normal AAC file and a lossless file, in my opinion, is probably not going to make that big a difference when you have such a limited tweeter and woofer. So I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's worth it. But if someone can tell the difference, and if it's going to be playing music over Wi-Fi anyway, why not? You know, get as much high quality audio as you can. I don't own a HomePod Mini, so I haven't tried listening to AAC and compare it to lossless, but I thought the original HomePod that I still have sounded great, and that never played lossless when I had it. So I was like, I don't think the problem with that product was that it couldn't support lossless. That was not the limiting factor, personally. Nobody says that's his name, by the way. Nobody says the M1 Air is still so good they're gonna have a hard time getting me to buy a new laptop this year. Yeah, I think it will mostly be aesthetic differences. Yeah, the M2 chip sounds like a reasonable upgrade, but not like a big leap forward. Like, the jump from the M1 to the M1 Pro and M1 Max, that was a much bigger leap than I think the M1 to M2 will be. M2 sounds mostly like an efficiency upgrade and a graphics upgrade. But again, not a huge one. We're going from an 8-core GPU to a 10-core GPU. Okay, it'll probably, I think I've said this before, but my prediction for the M2 chip is basically same power consumption. I don't think it will necessarily consume less power, but probably because it's a newer architecture, it can it can consume less power and achieve the same performance of the M1, but most of the time when you're trying to see how fast a chip is, you just take it to the max. I think it'll have the exact same max power draw as the M1 chip, but 15% improvement across the board. So 15% better CPU, 15% better graphics. You know, it's kind of like going from the A14 to the A15 chip. It's like, yeah, it's newer, but it's not like, you know, miles ahead. So the main reasons I think Apple is going with a redesign on the MacBook Air is, for one, because the current M1 MacBook Air was still originally designed for Intel. That same chassis and the layout of the outside and the inside and everything, that was still primarily built back in 2018 for Intel processors. And then when the M1 chip came out, they just slapped it in that design. They were like, well, we can retrofit it, you know, we can get rid of the fans now, but they kept the overall shell the same. The thing I'm most interested in for the M2 MacBook Air is like, okay, what does a MacBook look like when it's designed from the ground up for Apple Silicon and the ARM architecture? Like how efficient and how thin can you get it? And my guess is the battery life won't be any better. I think it'll be the exact same battery life, but because the chip is more efficient, they'll be able to make it smaller. Be like, okay, now we never need to put... What could happen if Apple designs a laptop that will never need fans? I assume it will be somewhat close to the 12-inch MacBook, which so many people love so much, but hated because the performance was bad and it had the butterfly keyboard, and a lot of people didn't like that. So it's like, that design, which a bunch of people were a fan of, is ripe and perfect for ARM in the M2 chip. So I don't think it will be exactly the same as the 12-inch MacBook, but I do think it will be close to that thinness and that lightweight design, and very compact, and they'll just have thinner bezels, because the 12-inch MacBook bezels were honestly pretty thick. So I think you could get a form factor pretty close to the 12-inch MacBook and still have a 13-inch display, and then make it colorful, and hopefully they don't put white bezels on it. That's my hope. But regardless, I'm not in the market for a MacBook Air. I'm very happy with my current MacBook Pro, and honestly, I've been using it on the go too. You know, I'll just like be like, well, I got to do some busy work or something. For the record, I've been working on new intros and outros for the channels, and I've been working on podcasts and other stuff behind the scenes. So I've been like, I don't have to work at my desk here. Like, we got the TV in the living room, and we can hang out in there while I'm working. So I'll just take the laptop, and, you know, I'm like, hey, I spent a lot of money on this thing. I shouldn't have to be tied to my desk every time I use it. So I'll just start using it, you know, on the couch. It doesn't need to necessarily go to another country, but I've been using it on the couch and stuff too. And I still feel like the 16-inch display is just a tad too small for what I'm used to, even though I've been using it for all these months. And, you know, I had my issues with the studio display. At the end of the day, I'm still like, man, this is a crammed display, and I can't imagine how I would feel if I was on the MacBook Air at this point. It would feel even tinier. But why would Apple advertise 105-watt power draw when they knew it would only get 80 under max load? Is that even legal? Yeah, that's a good question, Jacob. I still can't grasp exactly what Apple was thinking when they announced the M1 Ultra. I think they had the thought that it would get faster over time and they could unlock more performance, but then quickly realized that there was this limiting factor. It's a complex explanation, but it basically comes down to the bandwidth of the channels between silicon on the M1 Maxes being stitched together. Max Tech goes into far more of the details on his channel and on his Twitter, so I encourage you to check out his videos on the Mac Studio, because he gets into the nitty-gritty stuff that I'm just like, okay, give me the long short of this explanation, because it's very intricate and it's very complicated. But I don't understand why Apple wanted to compare the Ultra to the RTX 3090 when it clearly was never going to come close to it. And they didn't even want to talk about what the performance of the 3090 was. Like, they claimed that the 3090 at its peak was at like 300 watts, and it's really closer to 500. So I don't know why they did that. It's a bad move by the marketing department, I guess. Um, Will we ever get a regular HomePod again? Asks Alpha. I personally think so, but I don't think it will be like the OG HomePod. Mark Gurman has said that they are still working on a HomePod with a center stage camera and a display, to kind of combat like the Nest Hub market, where you have like a little tablet and it can show like someone, if they ring the doorbell, they pop up on there, and if you ask for recipes or music, it could play the Apple Music lyrics right on the display. So I think they have a higher end HomePod in the works. It's just they've discovered, and I think Google has discovered the same thing. You can't just sell a $200 or $300 speaker, but that's all it is. It's just a really nice speaker. Because like the HomePod Mini, honestly, already sounds really great. If you're gonna charge more for a HomePod, it has to have a display or a smart speaker of any kind. If you want to charge more than $100, it has to have like a dedicated display that can play content, and you could do FaceTime calls off of it. Basically running like a modified version of tvOS. How did these bugs get in here? Dang it. So I think that we will get a home. Maybe they won't call it a HomePod, but I assume it would be sold alongside it. Let's see. Once my HomePod stereo pair got lossless audio support, it went from sounding great to sounding amazing. Well, that's good. I'm glad you could tell the difference. I definitely couldn't, but I don't know if I would say it's like a deal breaker if it can't do it or something. But Marngel says, in one sense, I kind of hope the M2 MacBook Air will be ugly, so I would have no desire to spend more money to replace my M1 Air because of how so good it is. I get how you feel about that. Yeah, I get that same way about products. It's kind of evil. I admit it's kind of malicious to be like, I want to buy an Apple product that I think is a good deal and is really good for me and I'm happy with it, and then I buy it, and then all the ones after that become not worth it. That way I feel like I'm not missing out on anything. At least that's how I felt with my iMac Pro purchase. You know, I bought the iMac Pro at the very end of 2017, and honestly did not feel like there was a better Mac for the money until last year. I know that they technically made newer 27-inch iMacs that had faster processors than the iMac Pro had, but it took a while. It took a couple years. Yeah, I think it was like 2 or 2.5 years before they had processors and graphics cards in the 27-inch iMac that were outperforming the iMac Pro. But the issue with them, and the reason I still didn't feel comfortable with it, is because the speaker system was not as good, the cooling system was not as good, and the I/O was not as good. So it was like, yeah, okay, there's technically a newer iMac that's cheaper and has performance better than my iMac Pro, but it has half the Thunderbolt ports. The sound of the speaker system built into it doesn't sound as good as my iMac Pro does, and the fan revs up much faster and louder. It's not as adequate as a cooling system as the iMac Pro, because they actually had two fans going through that thing, whereas the 27-inch iMac just had the one. So anytime you did any kind of power intensive work on the 27-inch iMac, it sounded like a 747 taken off. It was like a PS4. It was like and I had several friends with the 27-inch iMacs, and it's like, yeah, they're good, they're fine. I just didn't feel like I was missing out on much by keeping my iMac Pro. Plus, I preferred the space gray. I didn't like the look of the silver one very much either. So, yeah, there was the Mac Pro that came out, but that was so absurdly expensive, and the base model one was crappy. It was $6,000, and it didn't come with a monitor or anything. So it was. The specs on that one were awful. If you wanted an actual competitive, like, good deal on a Mac Pro, you typically had to go for like a $8 or $9 or $10,000 model. And again, no monitor with that thing. So I felt like in that malicious, evil way, I was like, I got a good deal because I bought my iMac Pro for around $6,000, and it had good storage, really good performance, great I/O on the back, and great sound system. And I loved the color. The look of it was awesome. And it lasted me years and years and years. And even when the M1 chip came out, it was not faster. So I thought maybe when Apple made the jump to Apple Silicon, that was going to overlap my iMac Pro. But it did not. I tried. I compared it a couple times, and it could not beat it. But it wasn't until the M1 Pro and M1 Max launched, I was like, okay, now there's a good deal on a really good Mac that's got 120 hertz and mini LED and the big display, and it's mobile now, but it's faster than my iMac Pro, so I was happy with it. Yeah, HomePad, a HomePod plus an iPad, that's what they're doing. I know, but they just made the Mac Studio on an M1 Max. Wait, what are you talking about? Yeah, the M1 Max Mac Studio I absolutely recommend. M1 Ultra, I have a harder time finding use cases for it because it's not that much faster. Even though it sounds like it should be, it sounds like, wow, they put two M1 Maxes together. It's like, actually, the codec of exporting, especially because most videos are exported at HEVC or H.264, that's like the most common video format these days. Those H.264 accelerators or decoders that they put in the M1 Max kind of get limited when you have that many decoders. Like the M1 Ultra doesn't export videos faster than the M1 Max for the majority of codecs. If you're doing more stuff at RAW, if you're exporting like red files or like high intensive video files and you're not compressing them to H.264, then you'll probably notice the M1 Ultra being faster, but very few people are doing that. It's not that common of a codec, especially for online content, because YouTube will compress the crap out of it anyway. And RAW files are incredibly large, so the amount of people with internet that can support uploading videos that are RAW is very low. So basically, the people who should be getting the M1 Ultra are those who are not on the fence. It's like, for sure you're going to utilize it. If you're asking for advice, that means you don't need it. That's how I feel about it. Dovanus says, hope you're doing good. How many years do you think AirPods 2 will be around for? I have a feeling it'll be a while. I have a feeling that... Where are they? I had them on my... No, I left them in the living room. I have a feeling that Apple's supply chains have kind of been built out for AirPods 2, and they're good at scaling those quickly. So they're going to keep that sitting around $130. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we found out that AirPods 2 are the best-selling AirPods. Like, most people go into an Apple store, they want some wireless headphones. Those are $130. They're simple, they're easy to set up, they sound okay. They're not the best, but they get the job done. And I wouldn't be shocked if, similar to how the budget iPad sells the best, we found out AirPods 2 are the best sellers. But I probably think Amazon sells more AirPods than Apple does at this point. You can always get AirPods cheaper on Amazon. The iMac Pro was holding its own for a long time, not gonna lie. Yeah, it really was. I was happy with it. And I'm getting a similar feeling with my current MacBook Pro. I get the impression that, like, yeah, I'm sure they're going to eventually release an M2 Pro and an M2 Max, but I don't think they're going to be that much better than what I already have. And I do think I'm going to hold on to this laptop for a long time. Let's see. Are you planning on a video about Tim Cook's speech on privacy and sideloading? And Linus Tech Tips, Juan shows take saying Apple could just handle the privacy review of apps, but they just want money. I haven't followed that story very closely, mostly because I'm in the camp, and Randy can partially attest to this since he's in the chat. But both me and Randy are kind of digital privacy defeatists, I guess you could say. Like, we just don't really believe in privacy being a thing anymore, despite, like, there's some benefits of Apple prioritizing privacy, like making it easy for you to opt out of app tracking, or, making it easy for you to sign in to an account and give them a dummy email so they don't spam you. So it's like, there's some benefits that, or the iCloud private relay thing, although that breaks half the time. There's some benefits of Apple prioritizing privacy and security, but ultimately I don't think they care as much as they claim, especially when they were running all the billboards that say, privacy, that's iPhone. Meanwhile, they were taking Siri recordings, sharing those to third parties, and letting everyday people listen in on those. And that's just what we know about publicly. And I think it's an honorable cause to fight for, but it's kind of a hopeless one, because, the government can basically get what they want to get, and there's not really an easy way around that. Randy says good name defeatist is how I would label it. Yeah, it's like, if you have something that you want to keep a secret and you don't want Apple or you don't want the government to know about it, keep it completely offline and don't let it be on any device that has an internet connection. The VPNs don't even help much. and Apple doesn't even really do much at the end of the day. Like, if you're worried about something being accessed and it has a connection to the internet, it probably can be accessed. The most comforting thought you should have in regards to privacy is that there's just so much of a digital footprint because everybody has devices and computers and smartphones now that there's very unlikely going to be a government official or an Apple official all looking at your stuff because there's just too many of us. That's pretty much the best comforting factor. But the concept that there's some hacker or some government group that wants to look at your stuff but can't because you chose an Apple product, it's not very likely. It's like if they want to know, they'll know. They can figure it out. So I don't know much of what Tim said. I'm sure that for the sake of brand uh, loyalty and Apple wanting to save face and look good to the public, Tim Cook says they care about privacy and says they'll do everything they can to ensure users' privacy, but don't get your hopes up, basically. um, yeah, like Scott is saying, privacy is an illusion. That said, I'm glad there's a large tech company out there that cares about it, because imagine how much worse things would be if Apple was just another Google or Amazon. I do think they probably care more than others, but I don't think they care as much as they lead on, because, you know, they were caught in the Siri recording scandal, and that was just what they were caught in. Can you imagine what they're doing that they're not getting caught in? There's probably a bunch. Our best hope is that we can be lost in the crowd of data, but acting like any of your data is not accessible is unrealistic. Um, just based on how the internet works and how governments can access it and that kind of thing. So I'm sorry, I don't plan on doing a video on it. I think I've seen your questions on it in the past. I just I don't know if I love diving into it because I don't have a very happy ending or any good news to report on it. My opinion is just that it's hopeless. It's like, even if Apple says they care, they've still been caught behind the scenes doing all this other stuff. Um, I'm fine with that because I'm not really a fan of Meta or Google. Uh, well, I'm more of a fan of Google than Meta, but ultimately I don't like the concept of building your business off of tracking people and targeted advertising and that kind of thing. And Apple does make it harder for those businesses to make a profit on their platform. But I don't really like Meta and I don't really like Zuckerberg. So when Apple makes it harder for them, I'm like, yeah, good on you, Apple. I was like, yeah, you can do it. But I'm not like Apple is perfect and preserves all privacy when they get caught in stuff like the Siri recordings as they were running ad campaigns about privacy. It's like, there's some things out of Apple's control. I mean, the whole FBI wanting Apple to unlock the phone thing and Apple said no. I feel like a lot of people, they talk about how Apple said no to unlocking the phone, but they forget the fact that the FBI unlocked it anyway. Like, even without Apple's help, they were able to unlock it. So it's like, that's kind of summarizes the whole situation of like, yeah, Apple says no, government wins anyway. It's kind of hopeless. Apple now lets you opt out of the recordings. That's true, but they only introduced that option once they got caught, which is I don't know. It's it's not a good look in my opinion, because it just means like there's a bunch of stuff Apple is doing that they're not getting caught in, and we've seen things that are sketchy that they've been caught in, and then they add the option. Hey, actually, here's a Siri recording. Anyway, they don't care. It's good marketing and PR. That's all. Yeah, me and Randy have had off the record conversations about that kind of stuff. Uh, Things that I can't talk about publicly. But Randy's not the only friend, and I have family members that work in government, and for the military, and you know they know about media and stuff, and they've also told me about things that I'm like, oh, so we're all screwed. You know, it's like, and by the way, I've never used a VPN. Never have, and I probably never will. Uh, Apple said no because they knew it wouldn't matter. It was an easy win for Apple. That's true. That's true. That was actually a good call because they knew they would win a lot of privacy advocacy. They'd get a lot of praise in the media for like, good on Apple for caring about privacy. But Apple knew no matter what they said, the government was going to get in. So yeah, it's kind of a good call. Internet and privacy are like day and night. Not sure what you mean by that. But do you mean like Oh, they're complete opposites. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like if you want something to be private, don't let it touch anything related to the internet. Even a device that you're like, well, I'll only use it for this on airplane mode. It's like, no, as long as it has some way of connecting to the internet, it's not completely private. Um, it's easy to see that Apple's huff and puff about privacy is more PR than substance, but I think it does most of its good by promoting the conversation and pressuring other companies to make changes. Yeah, and like I said, there are convenience features. Like the sign in with Apple means that Google and Facebook don't bombard my email as much. So it's like, yeah, they take active measures that make it easier for other companies to not build a data profile on you. Apple doesn't really get much money out of that, but it does definitely hurt Google and Facebook's business. And I'm like, cool. Don't let them don't because I'm not trying to say that I think it's okay that I think we shouldn't have privacy. I just think that the concept that we can have privacy online or on the cloud is ridiculous. Especially with governments wanting to have more control and wanting access. It's like we can't win this fight. It's hopeless. But it's an honorable thing to fight for. It's like it would be great if we could, and I admire Apple for trying, but they turn around and do the same thing. Uh, VPN would probably help prevent DDoS attacks on a live stream. Maybe, but I don't think it makes that big a difference. Anyway, that's enough security privacy talk. Where did we go wrong? We were talking about Macs there for a second. What about gaming? Oh no, that's not what I meant. Man, I'm getting too picky with my subjects. Okay, Hayden says, do you think that you are more critical to the iPad and iPadOS because you grew up on Macs or grew up on iPads and think they are a great laptop alternative for basically everyone but programmers? No, Hayden, I grew up with iPads too. I mean, there were a lot of Macs in my childhood, but the iPad came out when I was 12 years old, and I thought it was amazing. I wanted an iPad day one. I never got the first iPad and was like, this needs Final Cut. This needs to be a Mac replacement. You know, I was in the logic. Um, I was in the band camp of like the iPad is so different from the Mac. You know, it's a 9.7-inch multi-touch display. And for the first several years that the iPad was a thing, I looked at it as an extension of the iPhone. I never looked at it as a Mac competitor. And I remember arguing with a lot of people, even when I was young and very little, that I was like, no, it's okay that it doesn't do Mac things. It's meant to just be more than an iPhone. It's meant to be more personal and more practical and give you more multitasking flexibility and just more flexibility. And like Steve Jobs talked about, you know, he was all into the iPad being this hybrid, more personal device, something that sits between the Mac and the phone. And I bought into that. Our family had the first iPad. I have it in the box over here. The very first iPad our family ever bought. Actually, we didn't buy it. We got it for free when we bought solar panels on our house, which was kind of cool. But we still have that iPad. And I loved it. I probably used it more than anybody else in the family. And later on, I bought the first generation iPad Air when that came out. That was like my first dedicated iPad. My family was finally like, okay, you've been using the iPad so much. I think we're all right if you want to buy your own. Yeah, exactly. Like Randy said, it ran iOS. It was running a version of. It was running basically the same OS as the iPhone, with some minor tweaks here and there. And honestly, even in 2022, it's basically still running the same OS as the iPhone. But where my critical opinion comes from is I expect growth. I expect improvements. I expect changes, especially as hardware gets better and more improved. And the iPad software team, I believe, has personally been functionally stagnant for the past 7 years. Like, I was so sold on the iPad and I was so in love with it that when the first iPad Pro came out, I was ready to ditch my Mac. I was using a 21.5-inch iMac at the time, and I was just like, okay, my iMac can do certain things. That's pretty cool. But now that what was it at the time? I think it was the A8X chip or something. No, it wasn't A10X, or it was the A9X chip. It was before the A10X because the iPads didn't have ProMotion yet. This was 2015 when I bought it, and they were like, we're going to make a 13-inch iPad, fastest Apple Silicon ever, and it can handle. I remember I was watching it in class. I was in college and I was ignoring the professor just because I wanted to see about this new iPad that had just come out. And they said, with this processor, you can stream three 4K videos at the same time within a iMovie timeline. And I was like, you can handle that much processing power on an iPad now? I'm in. So I spent a ton of money. You know, I was not working at the time, so I had to well, I wasn't working full time. I was in college, so I was doing part-time jobs, saving up money through video gigs and mowing lawns, and you know, that was not a cheap purchase for me at the time. It was 2015, so I was 17, about to turn 18, and I was ready. I was so ready to buy that iPad and save up all my money, and I blew basically everything I had. Thank you. E-Upload says it's A9X, so I don't. Alpha says it's A8X. Um, I knew it was not that fast a processor relative to now, but still, at the time, it was the fastest Apple Silicon to ever exist. And I was like, I'm going to go all in on the iPad. So I tried, and you can scroll back to the early days of this channel. I used to edit all of my videos on the iPad, and I did all my thumbnails on the iPad, and I was uploading all my videos on the iPad. And I was expecting for iPads to gain more software functionality over time, to take advantage of the present hardware, especially once 2018 rolled around and they started bringing USB-C and the A12X. That was the first time that Apple Silicon was surpassing Intel Macs that were available simultaneously. So the iPad Pro had a faster processor than the MacBook Air at the time. And I was like, this is where it's going. This is the future. Like, it's just a matter of time. We just got to wait for the next developer conference. We got to wait for the new software, but the hardware is here. This is it. This is the big jump. And I kept waiting, and I kept waiting year after year for the software to get to the point where there was basically going to be no compromises by going with an iPad over a Mac. And anything a Mac could do, eventually an iPad could do. And it's 2022 now, and that time has still not come. So that's why I'm more critical, is just because year over year, there has just not been enough changes to warrant the hardware improvements. Whereas iOS on the iPhone, I feel like they're doing everything they can with that hardware. Like, I don't think there's a bunch of things the iPhone could do if the software allowed it. It's like, no, the iPhone's doing everything it possibly can with the software it has. Same with the Apple Watch. It's like there's not that many more things that the Apple Watch could do if they just tweaked the software a little bit. But with iPads, there is so much more. There is infinitely more things they could do with the iPad if they tweak the software, but they don't. Every year they get more complacent. Yeah, they get lazy, and they basically just bring over a few more iOS features. Which, by the way, if they wanted the iPad to just be an extension of the iPhone, that's fine. But there's no point for the iPad Pro in that case. Like, everything above $600 is useless if you're trying to make something that you're gonna call an iPad but charge $2,000 for it and sell a $400 keyboard case. And, you know, if you're going to sell $1,000 iPads, I expect those to at least be somewhat comparable to $1,000 Macs. You know, I think an iPad, sue me, I think if an iPad is $1,500, it should be able to do just as much as a $1,000 MacBook, because it costs 50% more and it has the same processor. And back when the iPad first came out, you know, it had completely different hardware. It had the Lightning connector. Actually, when it first came out, it had the 30-pin connector. But they were not trying to pitch it as a laptop replacement. It was more of a laptop alternative. Now they've changed the marketing to be all like, this will replace your laptop, and there's so much shared hardware now. It's got the same display as the MacBook. It's got the same port as the MacBook. It's got the same processor as the MacBook. It's like, okay, now there's no reason. iPad has practically no competition. What is the return on investment in genuinely improving it? I don't think there is one. I think there is. iPads inherently cost more than MacBooks do. So if you were to make iPads that could do everything a Mac could, you could charge more money for them. 2-in-1s are always more expensive than standalones. So if you made an iPad Pro that was capable of doing everything a MacBook could, then try to price match an iPad to a MacBook Air. If you want the 13-inch display and you want 256 gigs of storage and you want a keyboard and a trackpad, it's going to cost you $1,600 instead of $1,000. So Apple gets more money. So that's the return on investment. You would get tons of people spending way more money on iPads if you gave them the pro-end hardware that the pro-end software that could justify spending that kind of money. Because honestly, The hardware they're selling today is frankly amazing. The fact that you can buy an iPad, 2 terabytes of storage, blazing fast M1 chip, mini LED, 5G, Thunderbolt, Apple Pencil support, 120 hertz, all of this, a Face ID. There is not another Apple product with all of these things into a single device. Sure, you get an iPhone with 5G, you get an iPhone with LiDAR and an ultra-wide camera, but you don't get a MacBook with those things. But you may get a MacBook with an M1 chip and a MacBook with Thunderbolt and mini LED, but you won't get an iPhone with those things. The iPad is combining all of this fantastic hardware from both sides. The only reason people don't buy it, though, is because the software is not there. If the software was there, I think there'd be a ton of people saying, oh, okay, yeah, I could justify a $2,500 or $2,700 iPad purchase. Easy, because it can do way more than my MacBook could. My MacBook doesn't have Apple Pencil support. My MacBook doesn't have Face ID. My MacBook doesn't have 5G. But if you just tweaked some of the software on the iPad, it could. It could do way more than your Mac could, so you could justify charging more for it. That's the return on investment, in my opinion. I do agree, though, with Elizabeth about the iPad not having competition. This problem is just as bad, if not worse, on the Android tablet market. The software on Android tablets is not optimized and not well built. And just watching people review the Tab S8 Ultra, or whatever it's called, seeing how the software is so poorly optimized on that display, I'm like, oh man, okay, it's just as bad an issue over there. I think the iPad could be this like ultimate epic 2-in-1 if they gave it macOS as a dual boot option. You could do so much with one device. It would be fantastic. If you got a $1,500, you need to do Mac things, buy a Mac. Well, that's what we're doing. That's what ended up happening. I'm just saying Apple will get less money at the end of the day, because if your logic is, if you want to do Mac things, buy a Mac, then I'm going to spend $1,000 instead of $1,500. So Apple loses in that case. So Drew is breaching the good word, Easter 2.0. Yeah. No, the Android tablets are not much better. If anything, they're quite a bit worse. So the iPad doesn't have much of a threat because it's still selling pretty well. At least the budget ones are. I don't think the iPad Pros are likely selling all that good. Technology is best when hardware and software integrate properly. Where did I hear that quote from? Was that my Pixel Slate rant? I think. I could be wrong. iPadOS is already a fork of macOS? I don't think so. I think iPadOS is a slightly watered down version of iOS. I don't even think it's a fork, because they take out a bunch of things. They get rid of optimized battery charging. They get rid of the weather app, the calculator app. They get rid of basic things that the iPhone has, and then replace it with multitasking and Apple Pencil features. But that's it. Have you ever tried an Android? Oh yeah, several times. On this channel even. I bought an Air and an iPad Pro because the iPad Pro isn't a full computer yet. Well, you're the reason they're getting away with this, but I think most people are just keeping their old iPads. That's the difference, because I'm not suggesting that the iPad should get the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip. The kind of person that still buys an iPad Pro and a MacBook Air is the type of person that's probably still going to buy a MacBook and an iPad, because the MacBook is still going to have hardware that the iPad doesn't have. Like, if you want a headphone jack, you still have to buy a MacBook. If you want an SD card slot or an HDMI port or MagSafe, you still buy a Mac. If you don't care about the touchscreen or Apple Pencil support, the MacBook Air will be a better deal. If you care about having silicon faster than the M1 or M2 chip, you'll still buy a Mac. So I don't see how that would cannibalize Mac sales, because Macs would still have a bunch of advantages. The MacBook would have better battery life. The MacBook would have better speakers. It would have a bigger trackpad. It would have better port selection. So there's still a vast number of advantages MacBooks would have. I don't see how iPad Pros getting more functionality would kill off the need. Let's see. Remember when Steve Jobs said about the iPhone's OS during... I don't know what MSF is, but I think I remember him saying that the first iPhone ran OS 10, but it was such a modified version of OS 10 that it basically wasn't even recognizable. Android tablets are limited like iPads, but for different reason. Android doesn't have arbitrary limitations. It has a decent file manager, but no good apps. iPads have the apps, but a bad file system. It's pretty interesting how nothing can have it all, right? I also just don't think the hardware on Android tablets is necessarily very good. Um, they usually get a couple things right, and then a bunch of things are massively wrong. Um, what do you think about Apple still using their god tier excuse? It'll cannibalize Mac's market so they can be more lazier on iPadOS software development. I don't know where you're hearing Apple use that argument. I've never once heard Apple claim that's the reason they don't do it. I've heard other people use that argument, which I don't agree with. There's a lot of people in the tech community that claim Apple won't do that because it'll cannibalize Mac sales. Apple's never said that, though. Mac World San Francisco, thank you. But yeah, I remember Steve saying it runs OS 10, but it didn't run OS 10 apps or anything. So it's kind of, I don't know why they called it OS 10. Um, let's see. A12Z iPad Pro is going to be God till at least 2024 upgrade wise. I think longer than that, honestly. I don't think the 2018 iPad Pros and later are going to be discontinued anytime soon. Um, excuse me. You made a comment in a previous stream along the lines of, I have my Mac for that. Other than missing iOS features, what else exactly do you want your iPad to do? I honestly don't really care or like the concept of having two products for different things. Like on my desk all the time, I have to have my iPad there for video thumbnails, which I think the iPad does better. And I have to have my MacBook for everything else, like Final Cut and desktop management websites. There's still weird things that the iPad doesn't get right with its browser. And Final Cut and OBS live streaming. There's all of these. And that's just me. There's a million other features that other software developers and video editors and audio engineers use the Mac for that the iPad can't. But again, it's not from lack of hardware. I don't want to have two. I want the iPad to get more Mac features. That's really it. I can't think of many things that I want the iPad to do that the Mac can't do. Um, it's like you've got the silicon, you've got the ports, you've got the pricing needs to be justified because I don't know what to tell people to do with an iPad with 2 terabytes of storage if it freaks out every time you try to import a 10 gigabyte file. That just doesn't make sense to me. It's like if you're not going to have a proper file management system and it freaks out every time you try to move a 10 gig file, how do you justify spending $2,000 on a 2 terabyte iPad? It doesn't make sense to me. Um, I don't like the way Microsoft approached the Surface Pro because they basically gave up on the tablet form factor and just assumed do everything through keyboard and mouse. And I guess there's also a touchscreen. But yeah, I basically think Apple could do a 2-in-1 better than Microsoft could because the software for the iPad has the app support and it has the fluidity and the user friendliness of a touch interface. But Apple's got the silicon and they've got the pro applications for a true productivity based keyboard and mouse interface. So I think you could make a product that is the best of both. I don't think you necessarily would need to compromise on much. I don't think Apple is looking at it the way you are. I think they're looking at it as $329 iPad versus $1,000 MacBook Air. The Pro isn't the iPad. I know that's how they're looking at it. I just don't agree with how they're looking at it because if there's people that are going to buy the $300 iPad, yeah, iPadOS is fine. But I don't think that justifies selling $2,000 iPads that can't do much else aside from 120 hertz Face ID and it looks a little newer. That's the justification for charging $1,800 more. It's like, yeah, pro mode or whatever you want to call it. I don't think iPadOS itself necessarily needs to change just for the pros, but just allowing a dual boot if you have an M1 equipped iPad, I think would be the best way of going about it. Is the dual windowed portrait feature in the iPad matters in your opinion? I don't know what you mean by that. Windowed portrait feature in the iPad matters. iPadOS Pro. I honestly think it's going to be much easier to just offer a dual boot than it would be to add a bunch of these Mac features to iPadOS. It would take too long. I know you want iPadOS to become better, but do you think it will? No, I don't. I've given up hope on that. I think that Apple could have made iPadOS a lot better last year, and they didn't. I don't know what has changed circumstantially this year. which is why I was comfortable going all in with the MacBook Pro, and it's why I'm comfortable still rocking an 2018 iPad Pro, and I'm not planning on upgrading this because I don't think iPadOS is going to change much this year. They'll probably give it a couple more Apple Pencil features and maybe tweak the multitasking menu a little bit, but that's about it. I don't think they'll change much else. Uh, Split iPadOS and iPad Pro OS, but the former would be useless. It would be useless. I don't think there's a need for multiple versions of iPadOS. It's like if you want a more capable operating system, you already have it. It's called macOS. Uh, I've had the argument with so many people and I've discussed it so many times. I've just discovered like I don't think I'm gonna budge on this, no matter how people phrase it from Apple's perspective. I'm not convinced that this is a good way of justifying $1,000. Like if you just want an iPad to be an iPad, there's no point in spending more than $600 on one. So they shouldn't be selling $2,000 iPads basically. Um, let's see. Good word. Lack of competition for iPad might be why Apple hasn't done much. I agree. M2 iPad Pro seems like a worse upgrade from the 10.5-inch to the 11-inch 2020. Well, I thought the 10.5-inch Pro to the 11-inch was a pretty decent upgrade. That was when they made the switch to Type C and Face ID and all that. That was a good upgrade. Plus, you got a faster chip, which back then probably mattered. Now it doesn't matter anymore because we're not maxing out our chips anywhere. With all the iPadOS limitations, a basic iPad is more than enough. For $900, my money goes to an M1 MacBook Air. Yeah, I just think that people would be spending more on their laptops if the iPads could do more. Because the iPad could become a really powerful laptop. Are you happy with all the different operating system names by Apple? Are there any that you would change? I don't think at this point I don't see the justification for iPadOS. I think you'd be fine just calling that iOS. It's not that different. They have the same app store. They have the same home screen layout. They have the same widgets. They have the same control center. They're so similar. I don't know why Apple decided to. That gave me a lot of hope when they announced iPadOS. I was like, oh, it's gonna be its own thing now. It's gonna be all different. But then iOS gained a bunch of iPadOS features, so I was like, well, why are we separating these two platforms? What useful function can't the iPhone do? I struggle with that. I still want a charge limiter, but that's mostly it. Not a ton of functional things I want the iPhone to do that iOS isn't allowing it to do. I kind of think it would be cool if Apple could install like a Samsung DeX-like feature where your iPhone could boot into a Mac and you dock it with a monitor and a keyboard and mouse, and now your iPhone can power a desk setup, but they're probably limited by the Lightning port because they still choose to use Lightning 2.0 on the iPhone, so that is probably more of a hardware limitation. I don't think that's much of a software limitation. If they gave the iPhone Thunderbolt, they could justify it, but does M1 stand for Mac 1? Nah, they never said that, but I guess you could argue that. I'm trying to picture macOS running on a really small screen. Does Sidecar work with iPad mini? Yep, it does. If you want to imagine macOS on a small screen, check out the 11-inch MacBook Air. A lot of people had those things. My sister owned one for a while. It was tiny. That screen is... ugh. But they did it, and they sold it for years. They kept selling that thing. It was a tiny, tiny MacBook, but yeah, they had it. It was pretty ugly, too. It had aluminum bezels. It was quite the ugly little rascal. Michael says I would like split screen on bigger phones and landscape mode on the homepage, maybe better codec. I think that's an aspect ratio problem because I've tried to use my iPhone in landscape mode and it's just the apps aren't built well for it, both Apple's and third parties. So it's like Apple's not trying and third parties aren't trying. The notch definitely doesn't help with landscape. It probably worked better with 16:9, but now that aspect ratios have gotten so tall on phones, the landscape stuff just doesn't work all that well. And I have not seen a split screen multitasking design on a phone I've liked. I wouldn't mind it if it was there for people who wanted it, but I don't think I would use it. I prefer just swiping back and forth between apps. Oh yeah, M1 stands for money. That's it. It stands for money, exactly. iPad Pro is literally just a premium. It's for those who insist on all the bells and whistles. It was not made to compete with the Mac. You can think it's overpriced for what it is. I do. I absolutely think any iPad that you pay over $600 for is overpriced. There is no software on that thing that can justify a $700, $800,000 purchase. Um, but I don't see the holdup of like why it can't do more. I guess I can't wrap my brain around that. Other people, I guess, can understand it more because they're like, oh, it'll cannibalize, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, no, it wouldn't. You can just charge more. I've got no problem with an Apple product existing, but as long as it's capable of doing something that no other Apple product can, it can justify that price. Like the Studio Display, it's very expensive for the 5K panel. It's not that fancy of a color range. The pixel density is not that high. The refresh rate is pretty standard, but it's got spatial audio. It's got the built-in 96-watt fast charging through the Thunderbolt port. Not a lot of monitors can do that. It gives you 3 extra USB-C ports. It gives you center stage. It looks great. It's an aluminum enclosure instead of all the crappy plastic enclosures the competition has. So it's got this unique set of bells and whistles so they can charge for it. And I'm not that upset with it because I'm like, this is Apple we're talking about here. They're trying to have like a luxury look and a luxury feel, and that they're not trying to make a cost competitive external monitor because they're the type of company that would want the monitor to be good looking and premium looking and feeling. And there's just way too many monitor companies out there that are going for cheap and practical and just an okay panel for the lowest possible price. Apple was never going to compete with that. So I didn't have the expectation that they would make a $1,000 monitor or less or something like that. But the fact that they sell a reasonably obtainable price that's made by them, but it has one size bezel and a good design and no logo on the front, those kinds of things are hard to find. So I'm like, okay, it's not for everyone, of course. It's not for anyone on a budget, but for the Apple enthusiasts out there, it's really great to have. Whereas I consider myself a fairly big Apple enthusiast, and I don't I don't see them going anywhere with the iPad software. It's just so fundamentally restricted, even though it doesn't need to be. I was like, okay, if you're worried about it cannibalizing sales, then charge more for it. Make it expensive. Yeah, I know. Alpha said this many times. Thank you for the super chat. But he says Studio Display should have a notch. The only reason I disagree is because it's a 16:9 aspect ratio, which means that if you're watching content on the Studio Display in full screen, the notch will cut in. Whereas on the MacBook Pro, because it's more of a 16:10 aspect ratio, the notch does not cut in on most video content. So I appreciate the super chat, but that's the only reason I disagree. If the Studio Display was a 16:10 aspect ratio, I wouldn't mind a notch. But if it's a notch on a 16:9, yeah, it's not worth it. And if your argument is that so the side bezels can be thinner, I don't think that's the reason that the Studio Display has somewhat thick bezels. I think it's because it's an LCD, and they're reusing LCD panels from the 27-inch iMac production line. And those panels are somewhat dated. They're not super new. And I don't think the reason the bezels are somewhat thick is because of no notch. I don't think they made the bezels like that just so that the webcam wouldn't cut in. When a display is that big, the bezel doesn't feel that large because you're looking at such a large display. So notch does not bother me. Notch does not bother me on the MacBook, but I think it would bother me on a 16:9 panel. Are you watching the Tesla earnings report tonight? It's not tonight. It's on 420 actually, but yeah, I'll be live on the Tailosive EV channel reacting to it and everything. But that is in 2 days from now, not tonight. Just an iPad or not, I want the best. My shallow or I guess deep vanity wouldn't let me get anything less. Yeah, I'm just in favor of like the software taking full advantage of whatever the hardware is. Like I said with the Pixel Slate review, the iPad hardware is capable of doing a lot, and the software is preventing it from doing so, which is where my frustration lies. Simply Pop says, I would upgrade my 2018 Pro if Apple increased the screen size, maybe a 14-inch Pro. Really? You'd want one that big? I don't think I could justify it unless the software could do more with it, but with what iPadOS is currently capable with, I don't see a point in a larger display, but Yeah, to each their own. If you want it, I got no problem with them offering an option. I would not upgrade my iPad for the 14-inch size, but uh, why not? Margel says, I'd argue the iPad Air is also overpriced because that is also marketed as a replacement for sub $1,000 window laptops and Chromebooks. However, iPads are still limited compared to those computers. I think for what iPad OS is good at, it's okay because a lot of people who are spending $500, $600 on laptops are not doing productivity. They're not live streaming. They're not video editing. They're not necessarily writing software engineering. Like the sub $1,000 laptop market is a lot of people buying machines for email, for word processing, for YouTube, web browsing, like college class basic stuff. And I can understand the iPad Air being an easy justification for people because it has the Apple Pencil support. So people are like, oh, yeah, it's great for note taking in math classes when you do charts and, weird layouts of numbers and stuff. It's hard to do that on a basic laptop. So the iPad can do the note taking and I can use the pencil and I can do photo editing with the iPad. It's got Photoshop or, sketch applications. It's good for drawing. And it's still an iPad, so it's part of the ecosystem. It's got AirDrop, it's got iMessage, it's got FaceTime and Center Stage and all that. So for that demographic, I get where iPad OS is not fundamentally limiting you. Where the A15 chip is enough. iPad mini, I think, is a great option if you're just like, I just need an iPad to be an iPad. I don't need it to do Mac things. iPad mini's great. I agree the iPad Air is overpriced. When I say more than $600 on an iPad, I'm not referring to the iPad Air. I'm referring to certified refurbished or renewed iPad Pros, which you can get for $600 or less. They have 120 hertz. They have Face ID. They have USB-C. That's what I use, and I think they're still great. And Apple sells refurbished iPad Pros for $600 with decent silicon in the inside. So I'm not referring to the iPad Air when I say iPads over 600 are not worth it. Because honestly, I do agree with you. Air 5 is pretty pricey for what it is. I'm also waiting for Better Call Saul. I'm a big fan of that show, and we've been waiting a while for the new season. Will a Mac ever have too much power, such as Macs get to a point where updating to a new chip be useless? We've got a long ways to go, because as long as it takes time for you to export content, there's room for improvement. Because there will be creators out there and channels out there that are trying to save time because time is money for their business. So as long as you can get a Mac with better battery life, because some people will use their Mac on the go and the longer the battery life, the better. Or as long as you can get faster, then there's room for improvement. So there's definitely a bunch of people that aren't going to justify it. Like myself, I fully acknowledge and admit there will be faster MacBook Pros while I own this MacBook. They will come out with an M2 Max, probably not this year, but maybe next year. They'll come out with an M2 Pro, an M2 Max chip, and it'll come into a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and it'll be faster. Maybe the ports will be better. There will be improvements, but will the performance gain of the M2 Max be worth the extra money for me? It's like, okay, now my video will export in 6 minutes instead of 8 minutes. Am I saving that much money by shaving off 2 minutes? Not really. So the price won't be justified for that many people, but instant exports is the perfect goal, like Randy said. Yeah. Until we have instant exports, there's room for improvement. Not to say that'll never happen. Maybe if we get to the point where 40, 50 years from now, processors are so fast you can just hit export and it's done immediately. Yeah, that's okay. Now we've hit a wall. We can't upgrade, but I think Apple knows that. That's why they're pushing more towards services, monthly subscriptions. Unfortunately, they'll probably turn Final Cut into a subscription, and I'm not looking forward to that. But yeah, they want more recurring revenue because they see long-term success with, people paying for something monthly. Because you'll pay for that for a long, long time, and that secures Apple's future. Whereas getting you to upgrade your hardware every year, that's going away. That's getting less and less common, and less people are justifying that. M2 so soon, says Lord Zero. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it. Yeah, we could be wrong, but I'm still trying to not get expectations up. But there is references in Studio Display firmware that the M2 Mac Mini could launch in June, or at least be unveiled. Um, I still think there might be just a software event, but the the leaks and the rumors are not uh, going in my favor right now. Everything's leaning in Gurman's favor as far as leaks go. Um, Marngel says, I disagree. As a college student, I still can't use an iPad as my only computer because iPad OS has stupid limitations that even affect casual users. Well, it's not a one size fits all. It depends on the class. Like, I didn't own a MacBook through college, but I just got by with the iPad. Thank you for the support, Chris Otham. Hope you're having a great day. I am. I enjoy chatting with you guys and answering questions directly because I get to gauge what you're most interested in and what you guys most want to talk about. But um, I don't need to sugarcoat it. I don't need to be on it. I don't need to hide things to you. Sometimes the tech news gets pretty dry. There's a lot of things I'm talking about in the EV space right now. So the EV channel, I have a big list of ideas and stuff. But on tech, it's kind of there's not much going on, frankly. At least with Apple, which is what I think most of my audience cares about. It's definitely what I care about. I don't, occasionally I glance and see what's going on in the Android world or the Windows world, and I'm like, whatever. It's not looking too interesting. But that's why I apologize. They're probably not watching, but to the people out there who don't like the live streams or don't like the longer form content, I apologize because this is probably the most fun way and the most engaging way for me to figure out, okay, what is my audience interested in? And let me talk about that in real time. Whereas when I do edited videos, I'm trying to guess subjects and topics that you guys find interesting and try to make it as interesting as I can. But sometimes it's hard to do that when the news gets slow. So yeah, there may be more live streams for the future of Tailosive Tech. There might be a bit more of this, just because if I don't have a topic that I feel like I can turn into a video or that much news to go off of, I'm just gonna go live because then you guys can ask whatever you want and I can address it directly. So I hope that's entertaining and engaging for you guys because I'm trying my best to make content that you enjoy and find interesting. But it's very, very difficult when a lot of my content is strictly news-based. So when there's not much news, there's very little to talk about. Full-time streamer goals. What about the rumored Apple gallium nitrate charger? Yeah, we did a whole stream on that. It's like, I want them to do it. They should do it. Okay. Done. There's not like a whole video I can make on that. Besides EVs, what markets do you wish Apple entered? Definitely the dedicated camera business. No question. I think it would overlap a lot with the Mac user base. Like some people have said Apple should do... I try to avoid this, but Apple should get into the gaming market. They should make a gaming Mac and a gaming console and stuff. It's like there's not much overlap with like the desktop PC gaming market and the Mac market, because that demographic usually prefers custom-built PCs and having control over the hardware, and Apple statistically and historically just always caters to the opposite of that. Apple likes making hardware that you can't open up and you can't upgrade and you don't work on and you don't get to mess around with, so that even if Apple invested billions of dollars into making a gaming Mac, the gaming community would probably not like it that much, and they would probably still reject it because it's Apple and it's Mac OS and it's not running Windows, and that's not what they're used to, and they can't work on it and they can't upgrade it. So that's why I'm like, there's not much overlap for Apple to go into the gaming market, and they already make plenty of money off of the iOS gaming sector. In fact, iOS gaming is more profitable than PC gaming, so it's kind of not worth investing in. But the number of people buying MacBooks and Mac Studios and Mac Pros that also are buying camera gear, oh, it's huge. There's a huge overlap there. Thank you for the super chat, Ben. So yeah, like there's a huge potential for that, especially with Apple's AirDrop technology, with Apple's efficient silicon. That could be extremely helpful in a camera, to have something that's capable of writing data really quickly, and the computational performance of iPhone cameras and deep fusion and night mode. If you could apply all of that to a fully dedicated sensor, if Apple could make a device and they didn't have to stuff the entire camera module into something the size of a silver dollar and instead could make a whole product around it, they could make just an incredibly fantastic camera. And they don't, because no, iPhone's the camera. Just put it on the iPhone. It's like, you're limited by the MagSafe ring, Apple. You can't make these lenses much bigger. I don't think that argument will work for me. I'm not going to be a believer of we'll just make the iPhone camera better until they film an entire Apple event with just the iPhone camera. They don't do that. Apple makes commercials and they stream their events with dedicated camera equipment. So as long as they're using dedicated pro equipment, then Apple themselves are acknowledging that the iPhone camera is not good enough. So a standalone camera that you could airdrop footage and pictures to the Mac, and have it work directly with Final Cut, so you could plug in a Thunderbolt cable to your Mac, record a video at high bitrate, high frame rate, high resolution, and it's showing up directly into your Final Cut timeline, and you can edit it as soon as you hit the stop button. You could bypass the import process. You don't need the SD card slot. You don't need CFast cards. You could just record video directly into your timeline. It would be so much faster. It would save so much time. Or if you're a photographer, you don't have to fuss around with SD cards. It could have local storage, and you can airdrop the pictures directly to an iPad, a MacBook, an iPhone. If you want to share them with your clients, check out these really good pictures I took. Airdrop. Here it is. That's by far on the list outside of EVs. I don't think the camera market would be as big as the EV market, but yeah. There's so much potential for that. Anyway, Ben Rayner says, I like the long form and live personally. Love the interactions. Bluetooth speakers for the Mac Studio would be cool. Would you like that? Bluetooth speakers for the Mac? Yeah, I mean, I'm all in favor of wireless when good. Latency is not too bad with Bluetooth for certain use cases. It's a shame HomePods don't let you connect via Bluetooth. That would be great. But yeah, I'm all in favor of it. Thank you for the super chat, Ben. Apple should make fitness equipment or just buy Peloton and rebrand. I heard that all of the Peloton shareholders were pushing Apple to buy them out. Like all the people in charge of Peloton were like, please, Apple should buy us out. Please, Apple should buy us out. But I have a feeling that Apple doesn't want to buy them out. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Stefan. That's nice of you. I have a feeling that Apple being involved in the antitrust hearings makes them want to not buy out any major company because they're worried about the accusations of antitrust. And Peloton, some people were advocating as a competitor with the Apple Fitness Plus and that kind of thing. So if the antitrust court cases see that Apple Fitness Plus came out and it competed with the Peloton subscription, and then Apple ended up buying out Peloton, it would be a bad look. So as a company, yeah, it's a fine. I don't get it personally. I'm not really that into monthly subscriptions for working out, but I see a lot of similarities, and I could easily see the Apple Watch working with the Peloton, and if they built those two devices to work in tandem with each other, and you could build in Apple Silicon, or you could make a Peloton with a smart connector that is just powered by an iPad. That's a lot cheaper. So it's like you can buy this discounted Peloton, and then you just drop your iPad with the magnets on the back. You just drop your iPad in, and that's your display. And it could have a dedicated app that does all this proprietary stuff. There's plenty of potential. I got no problem with that. I just think the only reason Apple won't do it is because they're worried about what the government will think. They already have a lot of government hatred on their back just for making AirTags a thing, which I think is ridiculous because AirTags are awesome. And they probably are much better than the competition and therefore should exist. I'm not in favor of eliminating better products from existing because it'll make other companies go out of business. It's like, if you can make a better product, make it. Like, it's not Apple's job to ensure that every business stays afloat. Okay, Stefan super chatted. He said, how will 8K change video workflows? I don't really grasp how it will. I mean, obviously, it just adds a bit more complexity or a bit more work to the processor and the graphics in a computer, but those are scaling up and improving. And also, I don't think 8K will ever be a standard. We've already seen 1080p struggle to become a standard, and 4K is not even the standard, and it's been around for years. So there is a law of diminishing returns with resolutions. The limiting factor with iPhone video is not the resolution. The problem with the sensor is not that it can't record 8K. It's the size of the sensor and the compression, because you can't collect that much light when you have a lens this small. So Apple tries to combat that the best they can every year, making the camera bump bigger and bigger and more obnoxious because it captures more light and it can make it look more studio quality. But the number of pixels the resolution is, that's not going to make it look much better. I've filmed with phones with 8K sensors. It doesn't look that much different. After a certain point, the pixel density is so minor. It's not a big deal. So honestly, my answer to the question, I appreciate the super chat, but this is likely an unexciting answer. I don't think 8K will change video workflows very much. Obviously, it just makes it harder for the computer to display the content, and it makes exports take longer. But that's about it. Most content won't be watched at 8K. Most video won't be filmed at 8K, unless you're filming, Netflix originals. There's really no point in fussing around with 8K because the number of people that are actually going to view it at that resolution is so small. Apple has enough of their own hardware issues to have to support workout equipment, which just breaks. That's true. I don't know how complicated Peloton equipment ages, but I never understood the business model personally. It seemed really expensive and not worth the money. I tried one once. I went to a friend's house who had a Peloton, and I was like, you can buy your own bike for this. Wouldn't you rather just bike around yourself? But I've had issues with my mountain bike, so I guess I kind of get it. I was like, well, I guess with an exercise bike, you don't have to worry about a chain or tires and that kind of thing. But you can buy like a non-Peloton exercise bike for under $100 and just watch a YouTube video of someone telling you, okay, speed up. Okay, stand up. Okay, now sit down. Okay, now relax. All right, now speed up again. I was like, why are you going to spend $2,000 and subscribe to this thing for $50 a month? It's like, I did not get that. That business model seemed ridiculous. Usually, if I get a bad feeling about a business that I don't know very well, my suspicions will honestly end up being correct. Not always. Like, I didn't think the Nintendo Switch would sell well, and that was obviously way off. The Switch was a major hit, incredibly well. It performed everybody loves the Switch. But I remember hearing about Movie Pass when they announced that subscription. It was like $10 a month and you can watch as many movies as you want. I was like, how the heck is that profitable? And then a couple of years go by, it's like, oh, it wasn't. They weren't profitable at all. It's like they were banking on people not utilizing the service, because obviously the only people who subscribe to Movie Pass are people that go to the movies all the time, and they watched a bunch of movies costing Movie Pass a ton of money, and they were losing money on that service, so they went bankrupt. It was like, oh, guess it didn't work. But it was my same premise with Peloton. I was like, that seems like a dumb idea. Why would they do that? And then ended up, yeah, they're not doing too well. And they're hoping Apple will buy them out, but Apple probably won't because they're afraid of the antitrust hearing. Apple just needs to allow Apple Fitness to support BLE. I guess I don't know what that is, but yeah, that might help. I've had my iPhone 13 Pro Max for about 6 months now, and my optimized battery charging has not kicked in yet. The setting is on, but it's always charging up to 100%. Have any way to fix this? I guess I don't. My best recommendation would just be to turn it off and on again. But I just want to be clear so people are aware, even with optimized battery charging, your phone will charge to 100% every night. It just doesn't charge to 100% right away. So I'll show you here. This is what it looks like. It basically goes up to 80% in the middle of the night, but it will top off to 100% before you wake up. So this one is expecting me to wake up around, 6 a.m. or whatever. So it charges up to 100% right before 6. So don't assume that if optimized battery charging is turned on that your battery will stay at 80% like a MacBook does. That's like my MacBook Pro I leave plugged in all the time, so it just keeps it at 80. But yeah, the iPhone works a little bit differently. I wish it wouldn't though. I want a little charge limiter setting in here that would just, I could click a toggle that says, keep it to 80% at all times unless stated otherwise. But it doesn't, unfortunately. But the battery life is so good on this phone. I really cannot kill it in a day. It's very rare that I do. People were nervous about the Nintendo Switch based on the failure of the Wii U. That was part of my reasoning, but it was mostly just that I think I had a more futuristic mindset when I was younger. I used to think portless was around the corner, and I used to think that charging over the air was going to be a thing. When AirPower came out, I was like, or not came out, when AirPower was announced, I was like, whoa, this is the future. You know, eventually we can just have a whole desk and I can just drop my MacBook on the desk and it'll charge and my iPhone will charge and my AirPods will charge. And then as time went on, I realized how impractical and expensive and unrealistic that would be. And portless, I used to be a bigger advocate for. I was like, we got to get rid of all these ports. Let's do everything wirelessly as much as possible. But now seeing them ship 1 terabyte iPhones and support ProRes recording on the iPhone, I'm like, if you're going to record files that large and you're still not offering iCloud plans that go above 2 terabytes and you're advocating for more and more stuff to be stored locally with MacBooks supporting 8 terabytes of storage and iPads supporting 2 terabytes of storage, I'm like, you know, I think ports might be kind of useful, actually, in the meantime. I don't think we're that ready yet for iPhones to go portless, and it'd probably be a better idea for them to get the best port, which is Thunderbolt. And when I was younger, I thought things were going to move along quicker in terms of wireless technology and that kind of thing. With all the recalls and stuff, Peloton has safety concerns. It's legally not worth Apple's time. Yeah, I don't follow Peloton closely. I didn't know about the safety concerns and the recalls. That's not good. You could do a video on unlimited Google photo storage for T-Mobile customers. Wait, what? Since when? This is news to me. All right, we're gonna have a live reaction to this news. I gotta read this because I'm a T-Mobile customer, right? Do you have to have the phone, or can home internet work? Is this a joke? Am I getting punked right now? Unlimited Google Photos. Where is this? I'm looking it up. Oh, for $15 a month. That's ridiculous. That's not the same thing. I wasn't planning on making a video on it. This just sounds like a promo. This sounds like an ad. You have to subscribe. Okay, it'll cost you. T-Mobile is introducing an exclusive $15 per month Google One plan that includes both 2 terabytes of shareable space as well as unlimited full-resolution photo and video storage. Wow. Well, okay. Maybe that is... I don't know. How does this work? The plan will be available starting April 26th. Includes all the perks of the $10 per month 2 terabyte plan, including VPN access. Who cares? Advanced photo editing and extended trials for services like Stadia and YouTube Premium. I don't need extended trial. I already have Premium. It's also expensive if you're only looking for the unlimited photo storage. There's a lot to pay if you don't need the other benefits. Huh. I don't know if that'll work with my home internet package. I am a T-Mobile customer, but I'm not on their cell phone. I'm on Mint Mobile with my phone. Yeah, I thought you were talking about the unlimited, like what Google Photos used to have was unlimited photo and videos for everyone for free, and they got rid of that last year. But it sounds like you'll need to subscribe to both the carrier. Okay, I need to read more about this. I might be looking into it, but because I don't like subscriptions, like Elizabeth is saying. Thoughts on subscriptions? Netflix, leasing car, Toyota subscription to key fob, remote start, BMW subscription, seat heater, FSD, office software, iPhone hardware. I get why companies are doing it. Like from a business perspective, it makes sense. I mean, heck, even me as a channel, I'm doing it now. There's channel members that subscribe to the channel, which I'm very grateful for, and I'm thankful, and it makes sense. But I'm trying to cut out unnecessary ones. Which, by the way, I'm totally fine if any channel members don't want to support the channel directly. Or I hope you guys know, like, it's there for those who are willing, but it's not expected. I'm not going to be mad at you or disappointed. If everyone canceled, it's fine. I don't care. It's just meant to be a nice little extra perk for those being willing to chip in. That's what the businesses are doing. So I get it. But I do think that the amount of subscription services has gotten quite overwhelming, and we have cut out as many as we could. That's why I set the channel membership price to be pretty dang low. It's like, okay, I'm just a YouTube channel. I'm not offering anything really that important or special compared to Apple TV Plus, which is $5 a month. So that's why I priced the channel membership at $2 a month, because I'm like, that's probably what I'm worth. I'm not offering that much to people. I don't produce that much content. So $2 a month is about, after YouTube's cut, I get about $1.40 for every channel member. But that's interesting. I don't know if it works for me. That'll be interesting if it does. Um, I hope they continue offering that, though, because it would be interesting to. Um, Let me tap the link here. Will it take me to T-Mobile's website? At least you can get unlimited photo and video storage, even if it has a subscription. Right, right. Um, your first month of cloud storage is on us. After that, pay as little. Okay. Coming soon. This is what I'm looking at. Sorry, it's probably hard for me to bring it up on. So they already have storage plans for cheap through Google. Um, Limited photos and videos in full resolution. That's a pretty good deal for $15 a month. I have a feeling that's not going to last. That's what worries me. Qualifying service required. That might prevent it from working. Can be used by the primary account holder only. Okay, so it's... Well, that's weird. This is what I'm confused by. Share 2 terabytes of storage and extra benefits with up to 5 additional people. Unlimited storage for photos and videos can be used by the primary account holder only. So I think that means there's only one Google account that's getting unlimited photos and videos on Google, but Google One storage, which is like Google Drive, is 2 terabytes. I'll need to ask about that, because I'd like to know if I qualify. All it says is qualifying service required. But that's, yeah, as far as any subscription goes that offers unlimited photos and videos, that's pretty cheap. Because normally you're limited to 2 terabytes or yeah, with Apple One, I believe that's $40 a month. They give you 4 terabytes of iCloud storage. So it's not unlimited, but you have to get Apple One, which is funny. It's like 2 terabytes of iCloud storage is $10 a month. But if you want more than that, you have to get Apple News Plus. It's like, what? It's weird. Yeah, I might do a video on that, but I have to look more into it. Thank you for letting me know, though. That's interesting. Skylar Kelst, appreciate it. I wish I could stack iCloud plans to get like 4 terabytes, etc. You can. It's just through Apple One. You can't do it without it, which is stupid in my opinion. For optimized battery charging, you need to have significant locations on and system customization on in the location settings in privacy. Oh, I did not know that. Thank you, David. Why do companies add details, say you can do X and you can't do X in the product description? It's called marketing. That's it. Anyways, I appreciate the super chats and for you guys tuning in. Charlie says opinion on the ridiculous Tesla phone rumor. It's stupid. I follow smartphone rumors and I follow EV rumors. Both I follow incredibly closely. And I can say wholeheartedly with 100% certainty, there has not been a single legitimately believable source claiming Tesla was working on a phone. It was all made up. It's complete fabrication. No one with any lick of accuracy or credibility claimed Tesla was working on a phone ever. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. And of course, this stream will be available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify shortly. So take care all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.